Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine receiving health information, not from your typical doctor or, the latest medical study, but from a source claiming advanced, almost divine knowledge.
Yeah, knowledge that really challenges the very foundations of conventional medicine and even a lot of alternative approaches too.
That's the unique territory we're exploring today.
We're doing a deep dive into excerpts from the book Medical Medium Revised and Expanded by Anthony William.
And the source material you've shared, it's a really fascinating collection. It's full of claims about chronic illness, specific explanations for symptoms people have, um, detailed dietary guidance.
Right, unique healing protocols and some pretty powerful personal stories too.
Yeah.
And it's all presented through the lens of information the author says he gets from a spiritual entity.
The spirit of compassion, or spirit of the Most High, as it's often called in the book.
Exactly. So our mission here is to really explore the core claims in this text. We want to understand the proposed root causes for what it calls chronic mystery illnesses.
And look at the specific foods and practices it recommends, the ones it says to avoid.
And also the spiritual, sort of emotional dimensions of healing that it talks about. It's about understanding this, well, distinct perspective and why it makes the recommendations it does.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The foundation of this whole thing. Where does this knowledge actually come from?
Well, according to the book, the author claims he's received medical information from a spiritual source since he was just a child. He talks about encountering a gray man.
And hearing voices, right? Voices telling him about people's health conditions.
Yes, exactly. This ability is described as, like, being able to scan people, knowing exactly what's wrong internally and what they need to do to heal.
Even when doctors are stumped and, tests aren't showing anything.
That's the claim. Even in those really baffling situations where conventional medicine doesn't have answers.
And from this viewpoint, the book gives a pretty strong critique of both conventional medicine and even some alternative or functional medicine practices.
Well, yeah. It basically says that when it comes to these chronic mystery illnesses, medicine is still kind of in the dark ages.
And that misdiagnosis is just rampant. It suggests medical trends often lead doctors down the wrong path.
Right. The author points to examples like maybe using hormone replacement therapy incorrectly for women's health issues, or the big trend of blaming everything on candida.
Or treating Lyme disease as if it's just bacterial.
Exactly, when this perspective says it's fundamentally viral. We'll get more into that later.
But one powerful message that really comes through in the source material, it's aimed right at anyone struggling with chronic illness.
Yeah, it's basically saying, you are not to blame for this.
You didn't manifest it, you didn't attract it, you don't deserve it. It's a strong message that you have a right to heal.
It even mentions how frustrating it is when people say things like, but you look so healthy, when you're actually suffering quite a bit.
Yeah, that feeling of being invalidated because you don't look sick on the outside. This perspective tries to validate that and, well, shift the blame away from the person.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics. What does this source say are the main root causes for all these unexplained chronic illnesses? Because this is where it really diverges.
Right. A huge piece of it is the viral connection, specifically Epstein-Barr virus, EBV, and various strains of the Shingles virus.
Yeah, the argument is that these viruses are the kind of silent, underlying drivers behind a whole host of chronic conditions that medicine hasn't really figured out yet.
And the list of conditions the author links to EBV and shingles is, well, it's long. We're talking fibromyalgia, lupus, Lyme disease, MS, chronic fatigue syndrome.
Migraines, colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, IBS, celiac disease, insomnia, anxiety, depression, TMJ issues, even things like diabetic neuropathy.
Wow. So why does the book claim these viral causes are so often missed by doctors in tests?
Well, the explanation given is multi-layered. For EBV, the claim is that standard tests often only pick up a past infection, not an active kind of low-grade infection that might be hiding deep in organs.
Like the liver or the spleen.
Exactly. Or the reproductive system. Plus, this perspective asserts there are tons of undiscovered viral mutations and strains that current science just isn't aware of.
And for shingles, it's not just the rash we think of.
Not according to this source. It says there are many varieties, 31 apparently, and many of them don't cause a rash, so doctors wouldn't necessarily recognize it as a shingles infection causing, say, nerve pain or fatigue.
That's a really different way of looking at shingles, and the book also mentions triggers, right? Like getting the flu or COVID.
Yeah, the idea is that things like that can lower the immune system just enough to allow these dormant viruses, EBV or shingles, to kind of wake up and reactivate, causing symptoms or making existing ones worse.
Okay, so viruses are a big piece. What
The
else?
other major factor highlighted is the toxic burden, specifically toxic heavy metals.
Okay, like what kind?
Uh, the book lists mercury, aluminum, lead, copper, arsenic, cadmium, nickel, barium. And it links these to a whole range of neurological issues and other health problems.
For sure.
Things like anxiety, depression, OCD, ADHD, autism spectrum challenges, bipolar disorder, Alzheimer's, dementia, chondritis, spasms, migraines, and also liver dysfunction.
There's also that specific idea about midline canals in the brain, particularly in children.
Yes, the concept described is that heavy metals can block these channels, interfering with communication between the brain hemispheres. And this is presented as a possible underlying factor in conditions like ADHD and autism.
Right. The book uses Jonathan's story as an example there.
And it's not just heavy metals. The source also points to other environmental toxins, pesticides, herbicides, formaldehyde, radiation, various chemicals as adding to the body's overall toxic load.
So if these viruses and toxins are the problem, according to this book, what's the solution? This must lead us to the diet, right? Which sounds pretty specific.
Very specific.
Yeah.
And often counter to mainstream advice, the book lists what it calls troublemaker foods.
Foods to avoid for healing. What's on that list?
It includes eggs, dairy, gluten, soft drinks, excessive salt, most soy, canola oil, nutritional yeast, natural flavors.
Which the source says is hidden MSG.
Yes, that's the claim. And also fish oil supplements.
Okay. And the reasoning. Why avoid these specific foods?
The core idea presented is that these foods feed pathogens, viruses, unproductive bacteria, fungus, mold. They're also said to burden organs like the liver and pancreas, cause inflammation, and basically hinder the immune system.
Any specific examples jump out?
Well, it claims eggs specifically feed viruses and bacteria. Canola oil is described as creating barriers around bad bacteria in the gut, even causing scarring. And yeah, natural flavors being called out as hidden neurotoxic MSG is a big one.
And this perspective also criticizes some popular diets.
It does. It argues high-fat, high-protein diets are, well, misguided for issues like diabetes, hypoglycemia, and even candida.
And low-carb diets.
The book suggests they worsen adrenal fatigue because they force the body to pump out stress hormones, adrenaline, for energy instead of using carbs.
Okay, so if those are the foods to avoid, what should people be eating according to this approach?
The emphasis is overwhelmingly on fruits, leafy greens, herbs, wild foods, and vegetables. These are framed as life-creating, detoxifying, antiviral, antibacterial, and packed with essential nutrients.
There's a big defense of fruit, isn't there,
Well,
against the sort of fruit fear trend?
Absolutely. The book is emphatic. Fruit does not feed cancer. It fights it. It doesn't cause sickness. It's essential for survival and longevity. It even brings up the historical context of fruit being a primary human food source.
So what are some of the key healing foods or protocols recommended?
Celery juice gets a lot of attention. The claim is it helps restore hydrochloric acid in the stomach, heals the gut lining, and fights pathogens directly.
And it has to be plain, right, on an empty stomach.
Yes, the source stresses that, not mixed with other things.
Yeah.
Jennifer's story in the book is used as an example of its effect on digestion.
Then there's the heavy metal detox smoothie.
Right, another core protocol has 5 key ingredients: wild blueberries, cilantro, Atlantic dulse, spirulina, and barley grass juice powder.
And the idea is these work together to pull heavy metals out.
Yeah, to bind onto them in organs and tissues and help the body remove them safely. Jonathan's story is mentioned again in relation to this.
Simpler things too, like lemon water.
Yep, lemon or lime water, especially first thing in the morning, is recommended as a simple detox practice.
And eating habits, not intermittent fasting.
No, the opposite actually.
Hmm?
This perspective recommends grazing, eating frequent, smaller, nutrient-dense meals and snacks throughout the day.
Why grazing?
The argument is it keeps blood sugar stable and supports the adrenal glands, avoiding those stressful adrenaline surges that the book claims intermittent fasting relies on.
Okay. And does it mention specific foods for specific issues like adrenal fatigue or PMS?
Yes, it does list particular foods thought to be helpful for adrenal support or for easing symptoms related to PMS and menopause and various other conditions.
Got it. Let's maybe circle back to a few specific illnesses and see how this medical medium lens explains them in more detail. What about candida and leaky gut? Those are common topics.
Right, but the explanation here is quite different from usual. The book claims candida isn't the main villain. It suggests it's actually a beneficial fungus acting like a cleanup crew for underlying pathogens, viruses, unproductive bacteria.
So high candida levels mean there's something else going on.
That's the idea. It's a symptom of a deeper issue, not the root cause itself.
And leaky gut. Also misunderstood.
Yes, according to this source. It argues the term is often misused. The real problem described is often ammonia permeability.
Ammonia permeability. What's that?
It's described as ammonia gas, produced from poorly digested protein, often linked to low stomach acid or bile, maybe from high-fat diets permeating the gut wall. It's this gas, not necessarily holes caused by candida, that's presented as the key issue. Jennifer's story touches on this.
Interesting. What about type 2 diabetes and hypoglycemia? The focus is usually on sugar.
Not here. This book claims the primary driver is high levels of fat in the bloodstream.
Fat, not sugar.
Correct. The argument is that too much fat burdens the liver and pancreas, which leads to insulin resistance, and the pancreas struggling to produce enough insulin.
There's that Frankenstein concept, too.
Yeah, the idea that adrenaline mixing with insulin, maybe due to stress or eating fat while stressed, makes cells resistant to this altered insulin. So the solution proposed isn't cutting carbs.
It's cutting fat.
Significantly reducing dietary fat, yes, to allow the liver and pancreas to heal. Sarah's story is shared as an example of this approach.
Okay, and Lyme disease. We touched on it, but the claim is it's viral.
Firmly viral, yes.
Yeah.
Caused by viruses like certain strains of EBV, shingles, HHV6, and others, according to the book, not bacterial or parasitic like conventional medicine believes.
So treating it with antibiotics.
Is seen as harmful from this perspective. The claim is antibiotics weaken the immune system and actually feed the viruses causing the problem. Stephanie's story in the book talks about the difficulties with antibiotic treatments, what the source calls the Lyme trap.
Wow. Okay, so beyond the physical body, the viruses, the toxins, the diet, the source material also goes into the soul and spirit.
Oh, yes, quite deeply. It talks about the role of the soul, the spirit, and even angels in healing.
It introduces this idea of soul injuries. What are those?
They're described as wounds to the soul from really difficult life experiences, betrayal, loss, chronic stress, trauma. And the claim is these injuries can actually physically weaken the body and contribute to illness.
Including things like PTSD.
Yes. The story of Bridget and Jacqueline is used to illustrate this connection between soul wounds and physical health.
And the spirit, how does that fit in?
The spirit is described as this vital force that kind of keeps the body going, keeps things functioning, while the soul is healing from these deep injuries.
So are there practices recommended for healing these soul injuries?
Yes, the source provides specific spiritual practices and meditations. They're aimed at healing those wounds, releasing stored negative emotions. It even talks about releasing old adrenaline stored in cells.
And helping people reconnect with purpose.
Exactly. Things like the ocean, bird, and moonlight meditations are detailed for these purposes, regaining connection and inner strength.
And angels. People can call on angels for help.
That's part of the framework, yes.
Yeah.
The idea is you can call on specific angels like angels of mercy, faith, trust, healing, peace, beauty, purpose, knowledge for support.
Each with a specific role.
Apparently so. To help with healing, navigating challenges. Jill Story mentions calling on the angel of faith for support.
There's also a mention of finding strength by working for God.
Yes, that idea is briefly touched upon as a source of purpose and resilience.
Okay, so let's try to sum this up. This deep dive has really explored a perspective from the medical medium book that offers a unique and definitely controversial way of looking at chronic illness.
Yeah, it really shifts the focus away from many common explanations towards things like specific viruses, EBV, shingles, toxic heavy metals, and then puts huge emphasis on diet and also these spiritual and emotional aspects.
So it provides a completely different framework if you're dealing with persistent health issues. Different from mainstream diagnoses, different from many alternative theories, too.
And it offers very specific, actionable things to try, like the celery juice, the detox smoothie, that often run completely counter to the health advice you might normally hear.
It certainly gives you a lot of alternative ideas to consider if you're on that kind of health journey.
Absolutely.
Which leads us to a final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener, based on all this. The book claims that medical science is decades behind, that it might never fully grasp some of these concepts it presents, like the midline canal or the real story behind gut health.
Hmm.
So, what does that perspective imply for your personal health journey? How do you navigate seeking answers, finding what works for you when you encounter these fundamentally different explanations for how your body works? Especially when some explanations claim to operate outside the current understanding of science. How do you discern your path forward?